Sleep, and any breaking news about the tax bill you want to share with us?
Well, if there's breaking news, I'm not aware of it yet, and I did sleep well on the belief that we're going to pass this tax bill, that it has the economic driving impact that will create better jobs that I think is there. And as you and I have talked about before, there are two ways to increase the take-home pay of people working hard for a living, and one is to stop taking as much out of it right now. And the even better way, and I think this bill does both of those, is to see that there are better jobs in the future because we're more competitive than we've been for the last decade.
Is there any hesitancy, any second thought, any worry about the people who are saying that this will add to the deficit, that $1 trillion numbers out there, some other numbers you hear? Are you worried at all that this ultimately will add more to the debt?
I'm not. I think when you look at the traditional growth numbers of the country and the last 8 years, which have been well below the previous 70, you've got to believe that there is growth there way beyond what the bill anticipates. And it doesn't take very much growth to go to immediately to no new deficit, and a little more growth than that, and you start reducing the deficit, which is, of course, what you and I would both hope to do, but you don't reduce the deficit by strangling the economy, and I think this is going to make us a lot more competitive. There's probably more money on the sidelines than at any time in American history, and there's also more money overseas that is ready to come back than at any time in American history. Those two things together, I think, drive the economy at a particularly good time for us. What we've talked about before and what's going to happen in world food demand, what's happening in healthcare and the healthcare changes that are about to occur, what's happening in technology and manufacturing, all good and uniquely good, I think, for exactly where we live in the middle of the country. Anytime you're focused on an economy that has potential to make more things and grow more things, that's always good for exactly where we live.
I want to ask you about the conference committee, because if and when it passes the Senate, it's very different than the House bill. You have to go to conference committee, and that's where the horse trading really goes. Who do you see, or what do you want to see in that final bill stay, and what wouldn't you mind leaving? In other words, I guess I'm asking you, where are you on the individual mandate? Would you like to see that in the final bill, or would you not like to see it in the final bill?
I would like to see it in the final bill, and I think if we put it in our bill, I think it winds up in the final bill. It gives us a lot more potential to do other things because it increases revenue to the federal government when you repeal that mandate. And remember, it's a mandate that almost everybody that's paid that tax or that penalty in the past has been the lower income families. 80% of all of those penalties were paid by families that make less than total family income of $50,000. There's a very high part of that. There's families that had total family income of less than $24,000. So it's regressive. It is the most offensive part of the Affordable Care Act, and I hope we can repeal it. If it can't be there because of votes, that's another thing. But I really think the problem repealing it would be in the Senate, not in the House. And so if we repeal it in the Senate, I think it's in the final bill, something approaching the 20% rate, which is about the middle of the people we really compete with, which is exactly, by the way, McGraw, where the 35% rate was in 1986. We're just taking our competitive stance back to the same competitive position we were in 31 years ago. And this territorial idea and bringing up to maybe $2 trillion back from overseas in a fairly short period of time, all those things should stay, but also things that ensure that working families have the significant tax decrease they have from day one in this bill.
They say that if the individual mandate goes away, the rest of the insurance premiums for the people who are buying insurance is going to skyrocket. Are you afraid that's going to happen?
Well, it's been skyrocketing. That's maybe the most likely prediction you could possibly make, because it's been skyrocketing in our state. It's 145% higher than it was 3 years ago, and that's gonna happen. I think if we see even more people not in the individual insurance market that so many families can't afford anyway, that cost sharing element that's been there will continue to be there. What is that? That's if you do buy these policies you can't afford and you make less than 2.5 times the poverty level, your deductible is largely paid by that fund, and so that's probably important to keep that marketplace a marketplace for the next couple of years that insurance companies are willing to stay in until we find a better solution. What's out there is clearly not working. If you have the mandate, poor families are going to pay the tax. If you don't have the mandate, poor families are going to have an opportunity, I think, to look for insurance that better meets their needs.
So your prediction is that the Senate will vote to get it out of the Senate by today?
By today. I think we'll get that done today. I sure hope so. And then I think the bills are largely conferenceable. You know, there are differences in the House and Senate bill, but you know, the ability to still have some deduction for property tax, I'd like to see in the final bill. Certainly, the way we've treated student loans and the medical deduction, I'd like to. We being the Senate side, I'd like to see that in the final bill, and I believe there's room to quickly make those decisions and get a bill back to both the House and Senate and on the President's desk.
All right, we'll wait and see what happens there. You were subject of a New York Times story late last night, which a lot of people are talking about, where President Trump allegedly asked you, leaned on you, inquired about you somehow trying to stop the Senate inquiry into the Russia probe. And is that a true story, accurate story? And what are your thoughts as you read that story?
You know, I haven't read that story yet, but my thoughts on any conversation I've had as one of the members of the Intel Committee on this topic with anybody is that those are not conversations I should be talking about. You know, if anybody has a question on anything that came up in the public hearing, any question I asked or any public testimony I heard, I'm glad to talk about that. But I think it's not a good idea to talk about individual conversations you have had with anybody on this topic until we come to conclusion. And we need to come to conclusion pretty quickly. There's no question the Russians were messing around with our election. There's also no question that's happened. The Russians have done that in a lot of other countries. We need to come to some conclusions quickly that begin to protect particularly the vote counting and casting system, as we're just a few months away now from, say, the primary in our neighboring state in Illinois, one of the earliest elections, but that's an election that's going to happen in 100 days or so, and we need to have some findings that ensure that the Russians don't continue to mess around.
Just a point of question, because I certainly understand you having these private, off-the-record, closed meetings in these Senate Intelligence Committee about the Russia probe, and anything asked or answered, you know, is certainly subject to those privacy. But you said you want to keep those conversations private, including if the president were to ask you something. Are you saying the answer to him is, I'm sorry, sir, I can't talk about these hearings?
Well, you know, one of the things I've done, even though I got to know the president fairly well, or at least I got to know him a lot better in the couple of weeks before the inauguration that I chaired, is I've largely stayed away from the White House and meetings with the president until this Russia issue's concluded. It's something that the Intel Committee's been asked to deal with, and so I've had pretty limited conversations with the president, but I've had lots of conversations with lots of people on Russian involvement in our elections, and I think the proper place for me to be on that is not to talk about any of those conversations or to even confirm that that I've had them. You know, the president has clearly asked publicly that the Russia probe be ended. You know, one of the public hearings we had on this with the FBI director, who 3 times told the president he wasn't under investigation. And the interesting thing to me when I looked at that and I asked the FBI director about that is on all 3 of those occasions the president didn't ask him that question. He volunteered. So, you can see if somebody's continually bringing up to the president, you're not under investigation. And in that case, the president was saying, well, why can't you tell people that if you're telling me that? And I think that's an understandable question for the president to ask, particularly from somebody who's had a career in business, not a career in government and politics. Just why, if you can tell me without me even asking you, can't you tell other people? So that's, I think it's not unlikely that the president continues to wonder why this goes on, and I think it is time to bring it to a conclusion as quickly as we can.
Senator Blunt, when it's all said and done and your illustrious career in the Senate is over with, are you keeping notes, and is there ever going to be a book?
Well, I've been able to be in the middle of lots of things, and I haven't kept enough notes probably on those things. But I haven't had time to think about that now, and hope not to have time to think about it for a while.
All right, fair enough.
See ya.
Senator,
You
be
bet.
safe. Thanks for checking in.
You bet. Bye.
7:20, Big 5.